The wolves stood in perfect silence, 16 shadows circling her mother's grave like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. And the largest one, the one with eyes like molten gold, was the man she had destroyed herself to escape. The graveyard was silent except for the crunch of snow beneath Aveline's boots. She had arrived before sunrise, the way she always did on this day. The 7th anniversary of her mother's death. 7 years since the world had taken the only person who had ever truly loved her. 7 years since Aveline had learned what it meant to be alone. The headstone was simple, clean, just her mother's name, the dates, and a single line Aveline had chosen herself. She loved fiercely, and was loved fiercely in return. Aveline knelt in the snow, her knees sinking into the cold powder, and placed the lilies gently against the stone. Her fingers lingered on the carved letters of her mother's name, Eleanor Thorne, and for a moment she let herself remember. Her mother's laughter, the way she used to hum old lullabies while braiding Aveline's hair, the smell of honey cakes baking in their small kitchen, the warmth of her arms when Aveline had nightmares as a child, and then the blood, the screaming, the rogues. Aveline squeezed her eyes shut, forcing the memory back down into the dark place where she kept it locked. She had learned long ago that grief was a beast that never stopped hunting. You could only outrun it for so long before it caught up and tore you apart all over again. "I miss you, Mama," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "every single day." The wind picked up, stirring the snow around her, and Aveline wrapped her coat tighter around herself. She wasn't sure how long she sat there, minutes, maybe longer, but eventually she stood. It was time to go. Time to return to the life she had built far away from this place, far away from the pack that had failed to protect her mother, far away from the memories that still haunted her, far away from him. She turned to leave, and that was when she saw them. Aveline froze. 16 wolves stood in a perfect circle around her mother's grave, their massive forms rising from the snow like shadows given flesh. They were enormous, far larger than any normal wolf, their shoulders reaching past her waist, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light of dawn. Wolves. Welcome back, my amazing viewers. Before we dive deeper into the story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love seeing how far our stories reach. All right, settle in, take a breath, and let's get back to it. Her heart slammed against her ribcage. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her legs refused to move. She was trapped inside the circle, and every single one of those wolves was staring directly at her. No, not at her. At the grave behind her. They weren't threatening, they weren't growling or baring their teeth. They simply stood there, silent and still, like mourners at a funeral. But that didn't make sense. Why would a pack of wolves be here? Why would they surround her mother's grave? Aveline's wolf stirred again, more urgently this time, and a low whimper escaped her throat before she could stop it. Something was wrong. Something about this felt wrong. And then the largest wolf moved. He stepped forward, breaking the circle, and Aveline's breath hitched. He was enormous, easily twice the size of the others, his fur so black it seemed to swallow the light around him. His muscles rippled beneath his coat as he moved with a grace that was almost hypnotic, his paws silent against the snow. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart. Golden, burning, familiar. Aveline stumbled backward, her heel catching on a root hidden beneath the snow, and she fell hard onto the frozen ground. The lilies scattered around her. Her pulse roared in her ears. No, 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 no. The wolf stopped directly in front of her mother's headstone. He stood there for a long moment, his head bowed as if paying his respects, and then slowly his body began to shift. The transformation was seamless. Bones cracked and reformed. Fur receded into skin. Within seconds, the massive black wolf was gone, replaced by a man. A man Aveline knew. A man she had once loved. A man she had rejected. He stood there, bare-chested despite the freezing cold, his dark hair falling into his eyes, his golden gaze fixed on the headstone. His jaw was tight, his expression unreadable, but there was something in the set of his shoulders, something raw and broken that made Aveline's chest ache. Adrian, the Alpha King, her fated mate. The bond between them roared to life, a desperate, agonizing pull that made her want to scream. It had been 2 years since she had last seen him, 2 years since she had looked him in the eye and said the words that shattered everything between them. "I reject you, Adrian Blackthorne. I reject this bond. I reject this fate." She had meant it. She had needed it. Because loving him, being bound to him, would have destroyed her. But now, standing here in the snow with her mother's grave between them, Aveline realized something terrifying. The bond had never broken. It had only been waiting. Adrian's eyes finally lifted from the headstone, and his gaze found hers. For a moment, neither of them moved, neither of them spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath. And then, in a voice rough and low, Adrian said the words that made Aveline's blood run cold. "I came to pay a debt." Aveline's hands trembled. Her wolf howled inside her chest. She forced herself to stand, forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching, and whispered the only question that mattered. "Why are you here?" Adrian didn't move. He stood there like a statue carved from shadow and stone, his golden eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. The other wolves remained motionless around them, silent witnesses to a reunion that should never have happened. Aveline's chest heaved with each breath. Her wolf was clawing at her insides, desperate to reach him, desperate to close the distance between them. But she held it back with every ounce of willpower she had left. "I asked you a question," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "Why are you here, Adrian?" He tilted his head slightly, and something flickered in his eyes, pain, maybe, or regret. "I told you. I came to pay a debt." "What debt?" Aveline's hands curled into fists at her sides. "You didn't know my mother. You have no connection to her, so what possible debt could you—" "I didn't know her," Adrian interrupted quietly. "But my father did." The words hit her like a physical blow. Aveline stumbled back a step, her breath catching in her throat. "Your father? What does he have to do with—" Adrian reached into the pocket of the coat one of his wolves had brought forward. When his hand emerged, he was holding something small and gleaming. A ring. Ancient. Ornate. The royal crest of the Blackthorne lineage, a wolf's head surrounded by thorns and moonlight, carved into dark silver. Aveline's blood turned to ice. "This belonged to him," Adrian said, his voice low and rough. "To the former Alpha King, my father." He took a step toward the grave, then knelt in the snow beside the headstone. With deliberate care, he placed the ring at the base of the stone, right next to the scattered lilies Aveline had brought. "What are you doing?" Aveline whispered, her voice trembling. "Why would you—" "Because she deserves it." Adrian's jaw tightened, his eyes still fixed on the grave. "Because what happened to her was an atrocity, and because someone needs to acknowledge the truth." "The truth?" Aveline's voice cracked. "The truth is that rogues attacked our home 7 years ago. The truth is that they killed my mother while I hid in the cellar like a coward. The truth is that your pack, the royal pack, did nothing to stop it." Adrian rose slowly to his feet and turned to face her. The look in his eyes made her breath catch. It wasn't anger, it wasn't pity, it was guilt. "Your mother didn't die because of rogues, Aveline." The world tilted beneath her feet. "What?" "There were no rogues." Adrian's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, something sharp and dangerous. "The attack on your home was staged, planned, executed." Aveline shook her head violently, her hands flying up as if to physically push his words away. No, you're lying. I was there. I saw—" "You saw what you were meant to see," Adrian said, taking a step toward her. "A brutal attack. Blood. Chaos. But it wasn't random, Aveline. It was an execution. Stop. Her voice broke on the word. Stop it. You don't know what you're talking about. I know more than I wish I did. Adrian's hands clenched at his sides, and for a moment she saw the rage simmering beneath his calm exterior. My father kept records, ledgers, orders written in his own hand. I found them after he died, and your mother's name was in them. Aveline's legs gave out. She collapsed to her knees in the snow, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. No, that's not. She was just a healer. She didn't have enemies. She knew something. Adrian's voice softened, but the words cut just as deep. Or someone believed she did, and that was enough. Who? Aveline looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. Who ordered it? Who killed her? Adrian's expression turned to stone. Someone under my father's command. Someone he trusted to carry out his darkest orders. Your father. Aveline's voice was barely a whisper. The Alpha King ordered my mother's death. Adrian didn't deny it. He simply stood there, his golden eyes filled with something that looked like devastation. And you... Aveline's voice broke again, but this time, anger surged through the grief. You knew, and you came here to what? Apologize? Leave a ring and call it even? I came here to pay respects to a woman who was murdered because of my bloodline, Adrian said quietly. And to warn you. Aveline froze. Warn me? The man who carried out the order, the assassin your mother's blood is on his hands. We believed he disappeared after my father died, but he's resurfaced. Adrian's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. And if he's back, it means someone wants to finish what was started 7 years ago. You're insane! Aveline pushed herself to her feet, her entire body shaking. This is insane! You show up here, tell me my mother was murdered by your father, and then expect me to believe I'm in danger from some phantom assassin. I don't expect you to believe anything, Adrian said, but that doesn't make it less true. The bond between them pulsed again, sharp and insistent, and Aveline wanted to scream. She had spent 2 years running from this, from him, from the suffocating pull of a fate she never asked for. And now he was standing here, dragging her back into a nightmare she thought she had escaped. I don't need your protection, she said through gritted teeth. I don't need you. Something flickered in Adrian's eyes, pain, sharp and raw, but his expression remained neutral. I know. Then leave. Aveline turned away from him, her hands trembling. Take your wolves and go. I don't want you here. For a long moment, Adrian didn't move. Then quietly he said, The danger is already moving toward you, Aveline. Whether you want my help or not, I'm not leaving you to face it alone. You don't get to decide that, she snapped, spinning back to face him. You don't get to waltz back into my life and play hero. I rejected you, Adrian. I rejected the bond. That means you have no claim on me. No right to... The bond doesn't care about rejection. Adrian interrupted, his voice rough. You know that as well as I do. Aveline's breath hitched, because he was right. The bond was still there, still pulling at her, still whispering that he was hers and she was his, and nothing, not even her own will, could change that. But she refused to give in. Stay away from me, she whispered. Adrian held her gaze for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. As you wish. He turned and shifted back into his wolf form in one fluid motion. The other wolves fell into formation around him, and within seconds they disappeared into the trees, leaving Aveline alone in the snow. Alone, except for the ring. It gleamed faintly in the morning light, sitting at the base of her mother's headstone like an accusation. Aveline stared at it for a long moment, her heart pounding. Then, against every instinct screaming at her not to, she reached down and picked it up. The moment her fingers closed around the metal, heat flared through her palm, sharp, burning, alive. She gasped and nearly dropped it, but the sensation faded as quickly as it had come, leaving only a faint warmth against her skin. Aveline stared at the ring in her hand, her breath coming fast and shallow. And for the first time in 7 years, she wondered if everything she believed about her mother's death had been a lie. Aveline didn't sleep that night. She sat at the small wooden table in her rented cottage on the outskirts of the old pack territory, the royal crest ring resting in front of her like a coiled serpent. Every time she looked at it, she felt that same burning sensation ghosting across her palm, a warning, or maybe a call. Your mother didn't die because of rogues. Adrian's words played on repeat in her mind, each repetition carving deeper into the foundations of everything she thought she knew. 7 years. 7 years of grief and guilt and believing her mother had been a victim of random violence. 7 years of carrying the weight of survival when she should have died too. What if it had all been a lie? By dawn, Aveline had made her decision. If Adrian was telling the truth, if her mother had been murdered, then someone in the old pack had to know something. Someone had to remember. She would find them, and she would find the truth. Margaret Thorne lived in a cottage that smelled of dried herbs and old books. She had been the pack's record keeper for over 50 years, and if anyone knew the secrets buried in their history, it was her. The old woman opened the door slowly, her cloudy eyes widening when she saw Aveline standing on her doorstep. "Child," Margaret breathed, "I didn't think I'd ever see you again." "I need answers," Aveline said without preamble, "about my mother." Something shifted in Margaret's expression, fear, maybe, or recognition. She glanced over Aveline's shoulder, as if checking to see if anyone was watching, then stepped aside. "Come in, quickly." Inside, the cottage was warm and cluttered with shelves of journals, scrolls, and ancient texts. Margaret gestured for Aveline to sit at a small table near the fireplace, then lowered herself into the chair across from her with a heavy sigh. "What do you want to know?" the old woman asked carefully. "Everything." Aveline leaned forward, her hands clasped tight on the table. "I want to know why my mother was killed. I want to know who she really was. And I want to know why the Alpha King's son left this at her grave." She pulled the ring from her pocket and placed it on the table between them. Margaret's face went white. Her gnarled fingers reached out, trembling, and she touched the ring as if it might burn her. "Where did you get this?" "Adrian Blackthorne gave it to me. He said it belonged to his father. He said—" Aveline's voice caught. "He said my mother was executed under royal order." Margaret closed her eyes, and for a long moment she said nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Your mother was extraordinary, Aveline, more than you ever knew." "What does that mean?" "Eleanor wasn't just a healer." Margaret opened her eyes and there was grief in them. Old grief, the kind that had been buried for years. She was a lunar bloodline healer, one of the last. Her gifts didn't just mend wounds, they could purify corruption, cleanse darkness from the soul itself. Aveline's breath caught. "I don't understand." "There's an old prophecy," Margaret continued, her voice growing stronger, "written centuries ago by the moon priestesses. It speaks of a healer born under the blood moon, a healer whose power would rise to destroy a corrupt royal line and restore balance to the packs." The room seemed to tilt around Aveline. "A prophecy?" "Your mother was born under the blood moon," Margaret said quietly. "And so were you." The words hit Aveline like a fist to the chest. She pushed back from the table, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "No, that's impossible. I don't have that kind of power." "You haven't awakened it yet," Margaret said. "But your mother had, and the former Alpha King knew it. He feared her, feared what she could become, what you could become." Aveline's hands were shaking. "So he had her killed?" Margaret nodded slowly. He couldn't risk the prophecy coming true. Couldn't risk a healer rising powerful enough to expose the rot in his bloodline. So he sent someone to eliminate the threat before it could grow. Who? Aveline's voice cracked. Who did he send? A man known only as the Wraith, Margaret whispered. The king's personal assassin. A wolf who could kill without leaving a trace. After your mother's death, he disappeared. We hoped he was gone for good. Aveline thought of Adrian's warning. The assassin has resurfaced. And my father? She asked, her voice barely audible. Where was he in all of this? Margaret's expression turned sad. Your father died before you were born, child. In battle. Elena raised you alone, and she did everything she could to keep you hidden, to keep you safe. Aveline felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she forced them back. She shouldn't have had to hide. She shouldn't have had to... A knock at the door made them both freeze. Margaret rose slowly, her face wary. She moved to the window, peered through the curtains, then let out a shaky breath. It's him! Who? The Alpha King. Adrian stood on Margaret's doorstep like a shadow made flesh. His golden eyes found Aveline the moment Margaret opened the door, and the bond between them flared so violently that Aveline had to grip the edge of the table to stay upright. I need to speak with her, Adrian said quietly. Margaret looked between them, then nodded. I'll give you privacy. She slipped past Adrian and out into the garden, leaving them alone. Adrian stepped inside and closed the door. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Adrian said, You've been asking questions. I deserve answers, Aveline shot back. You do. Adrian moved closer, and she hated how her wolf stirred at his proximity. That's why I'm here, to give them to you. Margaret already told me about the prophecy, Aveline said, her voice cold. About my bloodline, about why your father wanted my mother dead. Then you know the truth. Adrian's jaw tightened. My father was a tyrant. He ruled through fear and violence, and when he learned about the prophecy, when he learned what your mother was, he decided she was too dangerous to live. And you? Aveline's voice shook. Where were you when he gave the order? I was 17, Adrian said quietly. I didn't know. I didn't find out until after he died when I went through his private records. By then it was too late to save her. Too late to stop what he'd done. But not too late to find me, Aveline whispered. Not too late to... What? Claim me as your mate? Tie me to the bloodline that murdered my mother? Pain flashed across Adrian's face. That's not why I came for you. Then why? Because you were in danger. Adrian took another step forward. Because the prophecy didn't die with your mother. It lives in you, and if the wrong people find out, if they realize what you are, they'll come for you the same way they came for her. I'm not a threat to anyone, Aveline said desperately. I'm not. I don't even have powers. I can't. You do, Adrian interrupted. Your wolf is stronger than you realize. You've just kept her buried, kept yourself small. But she's waking up, Aveline. I can feel it. And he was right. Aveline could feel it too, a restless, burning energy coiling inside her chest, growing stronger with every passing moment. I didn't ask for this, she whispered. I know. Adrian's voice softened. But fate doesn't ask. It just is. Aveline looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd reappeared in her life, she let herself see him. Really see him. The exhaustion in his eyes, the guilt carved into every line of his face, the way he stood like he was carrying the weight of his father's sins on his shoulders. I'm sorry, Adrian said quietly, for what my father did, for what my bloodline took from you. I can't undo it, but I can protect you from whoever's coming next. Aveline opened her mouth to respond, and then Margaret screamed. They burst through the door together, Adrian already half-shifted. Margaret stood frozen at the edge of the garden, her hand pointing toward the tree line. "There!" she gasped. "In the shadows." Aveline's eyes snapped to the forest, and her blood turned to ice. A figure stood at the edge of the trees, tall, hooded, utterly still, watching. Adrian growled low in his chest, and the sound was purely predatory. "Get inside, now!" But before Aveline could move, the figure tilted its head, slowly, deliberately, and she felt the weight of its gaze land on her like a physical touch. Then it melted back into the shadows and disappeared. Aveline didn't return to her cottage that night. Adrian insisted she stay at Margaret's, with 2 of his wolves stationed outside. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she didn't need his protection, but the image of that hooded figure watching from the trees had stolen the fight from her. Someone was hunting her, and deep down she knew Adrian was right about who it was. By morning she couldn't stand it anymore. Despite Adrian's protests, she left Margaret's cottage and headed back to her own place on the far edge of the old pack territory. She needed her things, needed to feel like she still had some control over her own life. The moment she stepped through the door, she knew something was wrong. The air felt disturbed, changed, like someone had moved through her space and left invisible fingerprints on everything they touched. Aveline's wolf bristled, a low growl rumbling in her chest. She moved slowly through the cottage, her eyes scanning every surface. Nothing was broken, nothing was stolen, but drawers had been opened and carefully closed. Books on her shelf were slightly out of order. The blanket on her bed was folded differently than she'd left it. Someone had been here. Someone had gone through her things, methodical and thorough, looking for something. Or leaving a message. Her hands trembled as she checked the small wooden box where she kept her mother's journals, the only pieces of Elena Thorne she had left. Relief flooded through her when she found them untouched, but it was short-lived, because on top of the journals, placed with deliberate care, was a single white lily. Fresh. Perfect. Still wet with morning dew. The same flower she'd brought to her mother's grave. Aveline's blood turned to ice. She stumbled backward, her breath coming in short gasps, and her wolf surged forward with a violence that nearly brought her to her knees. Power flooded through her veins, raw, untamed, burning like wildfire. The lily blackened and crumbled to ash. Aveline stared at her hands, shaking as smoke curled from her fingertips. "What is happening to me?" She ran. Aveline didn't know where she was going. She just needed to move, needed to escape the suffocating walls of her cottage and the impossible reality closing in around her. She found herself at the riverbank, the same place she used to come as a child when the world felt too big and too cruel. The water rushed past, cold and relentless, and Aveline sank to her knees at the edge. Her reflection stared back at her, but it wasn't quite right. Her eyes looked different, brighter, almost glowing. "Your wolf is waking up." Adrian's words echoed in her mind and she wanted to scream. She didn't want this. Didn't want power or prophecies or any of it. She just wanted her mother back. Wanted a normal life where fate didn't dictate everything and ancient sins didn't come back to destroy the innocent. A twig snapped behind her. Aveline spun, her heart leaping into her throat, and found herself staring at the hooded figure from the forest. He was massive, even larger than Adrian, his face completely hidden beneath a dark hood. But she could feel his eyes on her, cold and calculating, and when he moved, it was with the fluid grace of a predator who had killed so many times it had become second nature. "Aveline Thorne," he said, and his voice was like gravel scraping against stone. "You have your mother's eyes." Terror locked her muscles. She tried to shift, tried to call her wolf forward, but the power that had surged through her moments ago was suddenly gone, leaving her vulnerable and human. The assassin took a step closer. "She begged, you know, at the end, begged me to spare you." "No." The word came out as a broken whisper. "I told her I would." Another step. "I lied." Aveline's legs finally obeyed. She turned and ran. She made it 3 steps before he was on her. A hand locked around her throat, lifting her off the ground. She clawed at his arm, gasping for air, her vision already starting to blur. This was it. This was how she died, just like her mother, choking on her own terror while a monster wearing human skin ended her life. And then a massive black wolf slammed into the assassin with the force of a battering ram. Aveline fell, hitting the ground hard, air rushing back into her lungs in painful gasps. Through watering eyes she saw Adrian, still in wolf form, locked in brutal combat with the hooded figure. They moved too fast to follow, a blur of teeth and claws and inhuman strength. Blood sprayed across the snow. Adrian's wolves burst from the trees, 6 of them surrounding the assassin. But even outnumbered, the man fought like something inhuman. He moved like smoke, like shadow, every strike precise and lethal. "Aveline, run!" Adrian's voice rang in her mind through the pack link she thought she'd severed, but she couldn't move, couldn't look away. The assassin's hood fell back, and Aveline saw his face for the first time, scarred, ageless, with eyes that held no humanity at all. "The Wraith," she breathed. His lips curved into something that might have been a smile. "The old king's lapdog," he said, his voice carrying easily over the snarls of the wolves. "That's what they used to call me. But I prefer to think of myself as an artist. And your mother," his eyes found Aveline's, "was my masterpiece." Adrian roared and lunged again, but the Wraith was already moving. He flowed backward like water, and before anyone could stop him, he vanished into the trees. Gone. As if he'd never been there at all. Adrian shifted back to human form, blood streaming from a dozen wounds. His wolves surrounded Aveline protectively as he stalked toward her, his eyes blazing with fury. "What were you thinking?" he snarled. "Coming out here alone? After what happened yesterday?" "I didn't know." Aveline started, but he cut her off. "You could have died." His voice cracked on the last word, and suddenly the anger drained from his face, leaving only raw fear. "Aveline, you could have, but I didn't." She pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the way her legs shook. "You saved me. Again." "I won't always be there in time," Adrian said quietly. "Then stop following me." The words exploded out of her, sharp and desperate. "Stop trying to protect me. Stop." Her voice broke. "Your father started this. Your bloodline murdered my mother. And now you want me to what? Forgive you? Trust you? Let you play hero?" Adrian flinched as if she'd struck him. "No," he said hoarsely. "I don't want your forgiveness. I don't deserve it." "Then what do you want?" "I want you alive." The words tore from him with such force that Aveline took a step back. "I want you to survive this. And I want—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "I want to end what my father began. I want to kill the monster he created. And I want to give you the justice your mother never got." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the rush of the river. "He said she begged," Aveline whispered. "At the end, he said she begged him to spare me." Something in Adrian's expression shattered. "Aveline, I want him dead." She met his eyes and she knew he could see the grief and rage burning in hers. "I want him to pay for what he did, and I want answers about why. Why my mother? Why me? What was my father's role in all of this?" "Then we track him together," Adrian said. "We find out who's helping him, and we end this." "I don't trust you," Aveline said flatly. "I know." Adrian held her gaze. "But you trust that I want him dead as much as you do." It wasn't a question, and it was true. She could see it in every line of his body, hear it in every word. Adrian Blackthorne wanted the Wraith's head, almost as much as she did. "Fine," she said. "We work together. But the moment this is over—" "You never want to see me again," Adrian finished quietly. "I understand." The bond between them pulsed with pain, but Aveline ignored it. She had to. They spent the next hour tracking the Wraith's trail, but it went cold at the northern border. Adrian's wolves searched in widening circles while Aveline and Adrian stood in tense silence. Finally, one of Adrian's wolves returned, a grey female named Sarah. She shifted back, her face grim. "We found something," Sarah said. "Tracks, but they lead directly to Marcus Reed's territory." Aveline's blood ran cold. Marcus Reed, Margaret's nephew, a wolf she'd known since childhood. "No," she whispered, "Marcus wouldn't—" "The tracks don't lie," Sarah said quietly. "Someone's been meeting with the Wraith, and those meetings happen on Marcus's land." Aveline looked at Adrian, and she saw her own horror reflected in his eyes. Someone close to her was betraying her to her mother's killer. They set up in an abandoned hunting cabin on the edge of Marcus Reed's territory. Adrian's wolves formed a perimeter, hidden but watchful, while Aveline and Adrian prepared to confront the man she'd once considered family. The cabin was small and cold, with only a single room and a fireplace that hadn't been used in years. Adrian got it working within minutes, his movements efficient and practiced. Aveline watched him from across the room, her arms wrapped around herself, trying to reconcile the image of the ruthless Alpha King with the man who'd just carefully stacked firewood to keep her warm. "We'll wait until dark," Adrian said, not looking at her. "Marcus will be less guarded then, more likely to make a mistake." Aveline nodded, but said nothing. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, Adrian turned to face her. "You should eat something. It's going to be a long night." "I'm not hungry." "Aveline, I said I'm not hungry." Her voice came out sharper than she intended, and she saw him flinch. Guilt twisted in her chest, but she pushed it down. She couldn't afford to soften. Not now. Not with him. Adrian studied her for a long moment, his golden eyes searching her face. Then he did something that surprised her. He sat down on the floor, his back against the wall, and gestured to the space beside him. "Sit," he said quietly. "Please." "Why?" "Because we need to talk, and because you're exhausted and too stubborn to admit it." Aveline wanted to argue, but he was right. Her legs were shaking from adrenaline crash, and her mind felt like it was splitting in two. Slowly, reluctantly, she moved across the room and sat beside him, keeping careful distance between them. The fire crackled. Outside, wind whispered through the trees. "Tell me about her," Adrian said softly. "Your mother, not the healer from the prophecy. Just Elena." Aveline's throat tightened. "Why?" "Because I need to understand what my father took from you, what I can never give back." The raw honesty in his voice made something crack in Aveline's chest. She stared at the fire and slowly the words came. "She used to sing," Aveline whispered. "Old songs, lullabies her mother taught her. She had this laugh, this bright, genuine laugh that made everyone around her smile." A tear slid down her cheek. She was kind, too kind. She'd heal anyone who came to her, even if they couldn't pay, even if they'd hurt her before. "She sounds remarkable," Adrian said quietly. "She was." Aveline's voice broke. "And she died terrified and alone because your father decided she was a threat." Adrian's jaw clenched, but he didn't look away. "My father was a monster. I spent my entire childhood watching him destroy everything he touched. When I became Alpha King, I swore I'd be nothing like him. I dismantled his alliances, freed the packs he'd subjugated, burned every trace of his reign I could find." He paused. "But I can't burn away what he did to you, to your mother. That blood is on my hands whether I spilled it or not." "You were 17, Aveline said, and she wasn't sure why she was defending him. "You said you didn't know." "I should have." The self-loathing in his voice was palpable. "I should have questioned him, stood up to him. Something. He would have killed you." "Maybe." Adrian looked at her then, and the pain in his eyes made her breath catch. "Would that have been worse than living with what he did?" Aveline didn't have an answer for that. They sat in silence for a while, the fire burning low. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the space between them shrank. Not physically, they were still careful not to touch, but emotionally. The walls were cracking, just a little. "You're a good king," Aveline said finally. "I've heard the stories about how you rule, how you've changed things." Adrian's expression was unreadable. "Does it matter?" "Yes," she said, and realized she meant it. "It matters." They moved through the darkness like ghosts. Adrian had shifted, leading 4 of his wolves, while Aveline stayed human, her senses stretched to their limit. Marcus Reed's house sat in a clearing, lights burning in the windows. Adrian shifted back, crouching beside Aveline behind a fallen log. "He's alone," he murmured, "but cautious. We need to be smart about this." "Let me go in first," Aveline said. "He knows me. He'll let his guard down." "Absolutely not. If he's working with the Wraith, then he won't expect me to come in aggressive." Aveline met his eyes. "Trust me." Adrian looked like he wanted to argue, but finally he nodded. "I'll be right outside. First sign of trouble." "I know." Aveline approached the front door, her heart hammering. She knocked twice, then once, the old pack signal. The door opened almost immediately, and Marcus Reed's familiar face appeared, his expression shifting from surprise to concern. "Aveline? What are you doing here? It's past midnight." "I need to talk to you," Aveline said, "about my mother." Something flickered in Marcus's eyes, fear. "Come in, quickly." The moment she stepped inside, Aveline knew she'd been right. Marcus's house smelled wrong, like fear and secrets. Papers were scattered across his table, and she caught glimpses of maps, names, coordinates. "What's going on, Marcus?" she asked quietly. "I don't know what you mean." But his hands were shaking. "You've been meeting with someone," Aveline said. "Someone dangerous. The Wraith." Marcus went white. "Aveline, you don't understand." The door crashed open. Adrian strode in, his wolves flanking him, and Marcus stumbled backward, terror written across his face. "The Alpha King," Marcus breathed. "Sit down," Adrian commanded, and the alpha dominance in his voice made Marcus collapse into a chair. "You're going to tell us everything, starting with why you've been helping a murderer." "I didn't have a choice," Marcus's voice cracked. "They said they'd kill my family. They said—" "Who?" Aveline demanded. "Who's they?" Marcus looked between them, and she saw the moment he broke. "There are others," he whispered. "Loyalists, wolves who served the old king. They didn't die with him. They went underground, waiting, planning, and when the Wraith resurfaced, they hired him to finish what was started." "Finish what?" Adrian's voice was deadly quiet. "The prophecy." Marcus looked at Aveline, and there was genuine regret in his eyes. "They want to ensure it never comes true, which means they want me dead," Aveline finished. "And anyone who might help you," Marcus said. "They know about your bond with the Alpha King. They know he's protecting you. They're planning something big. Something—" He never finished. An arrow punched through the window and buried itself in Marcus's chest. He made a horrible gurgling sound and slumped forward, blood pouring from his mouth. "Get down!" Adrian roared, throwing himself over Aveline as more arrows shattered the remaining windows. His wolves scattered, searching for the attackers, but the shots had come from too far away. By the time they secured the perimeter, the archer was gone, and Marcus Reed was dead. They returned to the cabin in grim silence. Marcus's final words echoed in Aveline's mind. "They're planning something big." Adrian paced like a caged wolf, fury radiating from every line of his body. "This is bigger than I thought," he said. "An organized conspiracy, multiple assassins, they have resources, support." "They're destroying everyone connected to me," Aveline whispered. "Margaret could be next. Or—" "We'll protect them," Adrian said firmly. "I'm moving my entire royal guard into position. No one touches the people you care about." "Why?" The question burst from Aveline. Why are you doing all of this? You don't owe me anything. The bond, I rejected it. I destroyed it. So why? Adrian stopped pacing. He turned to face her, and the look in his eyes made her heart stutter. Because it didn't break, he said hoarsely. The bond. When you rejected me, it felt like you'd ripped my soul in half. But it didn't break, Aveline. It just hurt. Every day since. Every moment. And I let it hurt because I thought that's what you needed. Thought if I stayed away you'd be happy. Adrian, I dream about you. The confession spilled from him like blood from a wound. Every night. I feel you through the bond even though you don't feel me. I know when you're sad, when you're scared, when you're in pain, and it's killing me that I can't, that you won't. He stopped. Aveline had closed the distance between them without realizing it. They stood inches apart, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, see the desperate longing in his eyes. I hurt you, she whispered. Yes. I hurt us both. Yes. Aveline reached up slowly, her hand trembling, and touched his face. Adrian's eyes closed and a shudder ran through his entire body. The bond sang between them, desperate and hungry and alive. I was so scared, Aveline breathed, scared of losing myself, scared of being owned by fate, scared that loving you meant betraying my mother's memory. And now, Adrian's voice was barely audible. Now I'm just scared of this. She leaned closer, her lips almost brushing his. Of wanting you, of needing you, of... Adrian's phone shattered the moment. He pulled back, cursing, and answered it. What? Aveline watched his expression shift from annoyance to horror. Where? He demanded. When? A pause. We're coming. Now. He lowered the phone, and when he looked at Aveline, she knew. It's Margaret, he said. The wraith took her. The message had been carved into Margaret's front door with a blade. Come alone to the Blackwood ruins by dawn, or she dies screaming like your mother did. Aveline stared at the words. Her hands clenched so tight her nails drew blood from her palms. Rage unlike anything she'd ever felt burned through her veins, and her wolf surged forward with such force that her vision flickered between human and animal. You're not going alone, Adrian said flatly. He stood beside her, already issuing commands to his wolves through the pack link. 20 of them materialized from the shadows, eyes glowing in the darkness. He said, I don't care what he said. Adrian turned to face her, and his eyes were pure gold now, his wolf riding just beneath the surface. He wants you isolated so he can finish what he started. I'm not letting that happen. Margaret. We'll save her, Adrian said with absolute certainty. But we do it smart. We do it together. He cupped her face with both hands, and the gesture was so tender it made her chest ache. Trust me. Please. Aveline looked into his eyes and saw no deception, no hidden agenda, just fierce determination and something deeper, something that looked like love. Okay, she whispered. Together. The ruins sat in the heart of the old forest, remnants of an ancient pack temple that had burned decades ago. Massive stone pillars jutted from the earth like broken teeth, covered in moss and shadow, the perfect place for an ambush. They arrived an hour before dawn, moving in absolute silence. Adrian's wolves spread out in a wide perimeter, invisible among the trees. Adrian and Aveline crept forward, every sense stretched to its limit. And there, in the centre of the ruins, they saw her. Margaret hung suspended from a stone pillar, her wrists bound with silver chains that burned her skin. Blood streaked her face, and her head lolled forward, unconscious or close to it. It's a trap, Adrian murmured. I know, Aveline said, but we can't leave her. They moved forward together, and the moment they cleared the tree line, the wraith stepped from behind a pillar. He'd shed his hood. His scarred face was fully visible now, twisted with cruel amusement. "The little healer and her pet king," he said. "How touching." "Let her go," Aveline said, and was surprised by how steady her voice was. "Your fight is with me." "My fight?" The wraith laughed, a sound like bones breaking. "I don't fight, child. I execute contracts, and yours has been active for 23 years, since before you were even born." "What are you talking about?" "Your mother's bloodline was marked the moment she drew breath," the wraith said. "The old king feared the prophecy long before she even existed. He spent decades hunting lunar healers. Your mother was just the last one." His smile widened. "Well, second to last." Aveline's wolf roared inside her, and power exploded from her skin, white light that made the wraith flinch back. The silver chains holding Margaret shattered, and the old woman fell. Adrian's wolves caught her before she hit the ground, dragging her to safety. "There it is," the wraith breathed. "The power the old king feared. But you're untrained, wild. You'll burn yourself out before you touch me." He moved. One moment he was 10 feet away. The next, his blade was driving toward Aveline's heart. Adrian slammed into him from the side, already half-shifted, and they crashed into a stone pillar hard enough to crack it. The wraith rolled with the impact, his blade flashing, and opened a deep gash across Adrian's ribs. "Adrian!" Aveline screamed. "Stay back!" Adrian roared, fully shifting now into his massive black wolf form. His pack flooded into the ruins, 24 wolves against one man. The wraith killed 3 of them in the first 30 seconds. He moved like nothing human, like a demon wearing skin, his blade singing through flesh and bone. Adrian lunged again, his jaws snapping for the wraith's throat, but the assassin was already moving, already spinning away. Blood stained the ancient stones. Wolves fell. And through it all the wraith smiled. "Your father's greatest weapon," he called to Adrian, "created to destroy anything that threatened his reign. You can't kill me, boy. I'm the ghost of his legacy. I'm eternal." "Nothing is eternal," Aveline said. White light erupted from her hands, not wild this time, but focused, controlled. She didn't know how she did it, only that her mother's power was singing in her veins, and she understood now. Understood what it meant to be a lunar healer. She could purify corruption, destroy darkness, end evil. The light hit the wraith square in the chest, and he screamed, actually screamed, as it burned through whatever twisted magic had made him into a monster. He stumbled, his blade falling from nerveless fingers, and Adrian saw his opening. The Alpha King lunged forward in human form faster than thought and caught the wraith by the throat. They went down together in a tangle of limbs, but Adrian was stronger, fueled by years of rage and grief and guilt. "This is for Elena Thorne," Adrian snarled. "For every life you took, for every family you destroyed." The wraith tried to speak, but Adrian's hand was crushing his windpipe. "And this," Adrian said quietly, his eyes meeting Aveline's across the ruins, "is for the woman I love." He twisted. The wraith's neck broke with a sound like a branch snapping. The assassin who had haunted 2 generations went still. It was over. News of the wraith's death spread through the packs like wildfire. Within hours, Adrian had summoned every pack leader in the kingdom to witness what came next. They gathered in the old throne room, the same place Adrian's father had once ruled with fear and violence. Adrian stood before them, still covered in blood from the battle, his golden eyes blazing with righteous fury. "My father was a tyrant," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the massive hall. "He ruled through terror, through assassination, through the systematic murder of anyone he deemed a threat." He held up papers, Marcus Reed's documents, the Wraith's ledgers, evidence of decades of corruption. "These are his sins, his legacy, and I am done carrying them." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Some of you served him," Adrian continued. "Some of you benefited from his cruelty. Some of you—" His gaze swept the room, landing on specific faces. continued his work even after his death, hired assassins, hunted innocents, conspired to finish what he started. 3 pack leaders tried to run. Adrian's wolves were on them in seconds, dragging them back to the center of the room. "The old ways are dead," Adrian said. "The old loyalties are ash. Anyone who stands with my father's legacy stands against me, against the future of this kingdom." He stepped down from the throne, moving among his people. "I am not my father. I will not rule as he did, but I will not tolerate those who seek to resurrect his tyranny." The 3 conspirators were stripped of their titles, their lands, their power, exiled to the far edges of the kingdom where they could do no more harm. The other pack leaders watched in stunned silence as Adrian systematically dismantled every piece of his father's remaining influence, every corrupt alliance, every dirty secret, every ghost of the old regime. By the time dawn broke, the old king's legacy was truly dead, and Adrian stood not as a tyrant's son, but as something new. A king chosen not by blood, but by the strength to do what was right, even when it cost him everything. Aveline found him hours later, standing alone on the balcony overlooking the kingdom. He'd washed the blood away, changed his clothes, but exhaustion lined every inch of his body. "It's done," he said without turning. "The Wraith is dead. The conspirators are dealt with. Your mother has justice." "And you?" Aveline moved to stand beside him. "What do you have?" Adrian looked at her then, and the raw vulnerability in his eyes stole her breath. "That depends on you." The bond between them pulsed, stronger than ever now that the walls were down. No more running, no more denial. Just the truth of what they were to each other, what they'd always been. "I'm scared," Aveline whispered. "I know. I don't know if I can do this. Be your mate, be your queen, live up to a prophecy I never asked for." "Then don't," Adrian said simply. "Be Aveline. Just Aveline. That's all I've ever wanted." She looked up at him, and for the first time since they'd met, she let herself see the future, not the one fate demanded, but the one they could choose, together. "I need time," she said finally, "to heal, to figure out who I am without all this grief and rage, to—" "Take all the time you need," Adrian said. "I'll be here, for as long as you want me." Aveline reached for his hand, and when their fingers intertwined, the bond settled between them, not demanding, just present, patient, waiting for her to be ready. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything, for avenging her, for ending it." "Thank you," Adrian said, "for teaching me what it means to fight for something other than duty." They stood together as the sun rose over the kingdom, 2 broken people starting to heal. The war was over, but their story, their choice, was just beginning. 3 weeks after the fall of the Wraith, Aveline woke to frost on her window and silence in her chest. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, just still, peaceful. She dressed slowly, pulling on warm clothes and her mother's old scarf, the one that still smelled faintly of lavender and honey. Outside, the world was wrapped in fresh snow, pristine and untouched. The pack territories had settled into cautious peace. Adrian had kept his word. The old regime was gone, replaced by something gentler, something honest. She hadn't seen him in 2 weeks. He'd given her space just as he'd promised. No visits, no messages, just the constant, steady presence of the bond humming quietly in the back of her mind, letting her know he was there. Alive. Waiting. Always waiting. Aveline wrapped her scarf tighter and stepped outside. She knew where she needed to go, where this had to end, or begin. The same place it had all started, her mother's grave. The graveyard was exactly as she remembered, silent, snow-covered, the headstones rising like sleeping sentinels. Aveline walked the familiar path, her boots crunching softly, her breath misting in the cold air. She saw him before he saw her. Adrian stood at her mother's grave, his head bowed, his hands clasped in front of him. He wore no crown, no royal insignia, just a simple black coat and the weight of everything he'd done, everything he'd lost, carved into the lines of his body. He looked smaller somehow, more human, more real. Aveline's heart clenched. She walked forward slowly, and the sound of her footsteps made him turn. Their eyes met, and the bond flared between them, not demanding, not painful, just present. A reminder of what they were to each other, what they'd always been meant to be. "I didn't know you'd be here," Aveline said softly. "I come every week," Adrian admitted, "to pay my respects, to tell her I'm sorry for what my father did, for what I couldn't stop." He looked back at the headstone. "I don't know if she can hear me, but I need to say it anyway." Aveline moved to stand beside him, and for a long moment they simply stood together in the snow, two people carrying the weight of the past. "I brought her lilies," Adrian said, gesturing to the fresh white flowers at the base of the stone. "I know they were her favourite." "They were," Aveline's voice cracked. She used to say they meant renewal. Second chances. "Do you believe in second chances?" Adrian asked quietly. Aveline looked at him, really looked at him, at the man who had hunted her mother's killer, who had destroyed his own father's legacy to give her justice, who had waited, patient and constant, while she figured out how to breathe again. "I'm starting to," she whispered. Aveline knelt in the snow, her fingers brushing the carved letters of her mother's name. The grief she'd carried for 7 years, heavy, suffocating, relentless, rose up in her chest like a tide. "I'm sorry, Mama," she whispered. "I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to save you. Sorry I hid while you died. Sorry I've been so angry for so long." "Aveline," Adrian started, but she shook her head. "I blamed myself," she continued, tears streaming down her face now. "Every single day. I thought if I'd been braver, stronger, faster, maybe you'd still be here. Maybe I could have—" Her voice broke completely, and the sobs came, deep, wrenching, the kind that had been locked inside her for years. She doubled over, her hands pressed against the frozen earth, and let herself finally fall apart. Adrian knelt beside her. He didn't try to stop her tears or tell her it would be okay. He just wrapped his arms around her and held her while she shattered, his presence steady and warm and unbreakable. "It wasn't your fault," he murmured against her hair. "None of it was your fault." "She died because of a prophecy," Aveline choked out. "Because someone was afraid of what she was, what I might become." "She died because evil men make evil choices," Adrian said firmly. "Not because you weren't enough. Never because of that." Aveline turned in his arms, burying her face against his chest, and Adrian held her tighter. The bond between them pulsed with warmth, with comfort, with the quiet understanding that some wounds could only heal when you finally let someone else help carry them. They stayed like that for a long time, long enough for the tears to slow, for Aveline's breathing to steady, for the grief to settle into something softer. Not gone, but manageable. Shared. Finally, Aveline pulled back slightly, looking up into Adrian's golden eyes. "I need to tell you something." "Anything." "When I rejected the bond," she took a shaky breath, "I thought I was protecting myself, protecting what was left of my heart, but all I did was hurt us both." "You were grieving," Adrian said gently. "You were trying to survive. I never blamed you for that." "You should have." Aveline's hands fisted in his coat. "I was cruel. I was—" "Human," Adrian interrupted. "You were human, Aveline, broken and scared and doing the best you could. And I loved you anyway. Still love you. Always will." The words hung between them, simple and devastating and true. Aveline's breath hitched. Adrian, I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I just need you to know. Whether you accept the bond or not, whether you choose me or not, I will love you until my last breath. That's not fate. That's not the moon goddess. That's just me, choosing you, every day, forever. Something inside Aveline shifted, settled. Like a piece of herself she'd lost years ago had finally clicked back into place. She looked at her mother's grave, at the woman who had loved fiercely despite knowing it would cost her everything, who had protected her daughter with her last breath, who had believed always in second chances. What would you tell me to do, Mama? The wind whispered through the trees and Aveline could almost hear her mother's voice. Choose love, my darling. Always choose love. Aveline turned back to Adrian, and this time she didn't hesitate. She reached up and cupped his face with both hands, feeling the way he trembled at her touch, seeing the desperate hope flickering in his eyes. I choose you, she whispered. Not because fate demands it, not because of prophecies or bonds or destiny. I choose you because you're kind, because you're brave, because you fought for justice even when it cost you everything, because you waited for me to be ready. Her voice broke. Because I love you, Adrian Blackthorne, and I'm tired of being afraid of that. Adrian's eyes went wide, golden and bright with unshed tears. Aveline, I accept the bond, she said clearly. I accept you. I accept us. The moment the words left her lips, the bond between them ignited. It wasn't painful or violent. It was beautiful, like sunrise breaking over darkness, like coming home after years of being lost. The moon goddess's blessing settled over them, warm and complete, sealing what had always been meant to be. Adrian made a sound, something between a laugh and a sob, and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off the ground and spinning her once before setting her down gently. His forehead pressed against hers, their breaths mingling in the cold air. I will spend the rest of my life proving you made the right choice, he whispered. I know, Aveline said, and she did. She could feel it in the bond, in the way his soul tangled with hers, two broken pieces finally whole. Adrian kissed her then, soft and reverent and full of promises, and Aveline kissed him back, tasting salt from tears and snow and the future they would build together. When they finally pulled apart, Adrian kept her close, his arms wrapped securely around her waist. They turned together to face her mother's grave, and Aveline rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Thank you, Mama, she whispered, for everything, for loving me, for protecting me, for teaching me that love is always worth the risk. The wind picked up, stirring the snow around them, and for just a moment, Aveline swore she felt her mother's presence, warm and proud and at peace. She would have liked you, Aveline said to Adrian. I hope so. Adrian pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I would have liked to know her. They stood together as the sun climbed higher, warming the frozen earth. No armies, no wolves, no prophecies or vengeance or fear, just two souls who had found each other in the darkness and chosen to walk into the light together. Ready to go home? Adrian asked softly. Aveline looked up at him and smiled, really smiled, for the first time in years. With you? Always. They walked away from the grave hand in hand, leaving behind the ghosts of the past and stepping into the future. The mate bond hummed between them, complete and eternal, exactly as the moon goddess had always intended. She found her ending where her story began, at her mother's grave, but this time she was no longer alone. She had found her mate. She had found her destiny. She had found herself. And finally, she had found peace. Thank you so much for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next upload. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. Tell me in the comments what you think about this story and where you're watching from. Your support means a lot, and helps us keep creating more stories like this. Until next time, stay safe, stay inspired,